Ethan had always been a creature of routine. His mornings began with the same ritual: brewing black coffee, scrolling through emails, and glancing out of his apartment window at the quiet street below. Life was predictable, safe, and, frankly, a little lonely. He often wondered if there was more beyond the walls of his tidy, solitary existence. It was on one of these ordinary mornings that he noticed something unusual across the street. Lucas's warehouse. Lucas, his neighbor, was a man who carried an air of mystery effortlessly. In his early 30s, with a sharp jawline and eyes that seemed to read beyond the obvious, he lived alone, or so Ethan thought. The warehouse, a massive, brick-fronted structure, had always been an enigma. Occasionally, Ethan would catch glimpses of movement through the tall, grimy windows, but he never dared approach. Yet, today, the sight of late-night lights and shadows moving inside stirred a curiosity he couldn't ignore. A week later, opportunity arrived disguised as coincidence. Lucas met Ethan outside the building, holding a box of what appeared to be old tools. "Ethan," he said, voice casual but tinged with something warmer than mere neighborly politeness, "could you give me a hand in the warehouse? These things are heavier than I expected." Ethan hesitated. The invitation felt harmless on the surface, yet there was something magnetic about Lucas's gaze. Something that made his chest tighten and his thoughts scramble. He nodded, trying to steady his pulse. "Sure, I can help." The warehouse itself was larger than Ethan had imagined. High ceilings loomed over stacks of crates, and the scent of sawdust mingled with the faint metallic tang of machinery. Light filtered in through dusty windows, casting long shadows that danced across the concrete floor. Each step Ethan took echoed loudly, filling the cavernous space with a rhythmic percussion. He felt simultaneously dwarfed and drawn in by the scale of it all. As they moved boxes together, Lucas's presence became impossible to ignore. Every brush of his hand against Ethan's as they shifted a crate sent a small jolt of awareness through him. Lucas laughed easily at his own clumsiness, the sound rich and disarming. He told stories of his childhood, of small-town adventures that were punctuated by laughter and occasional regret. Ethan listened, captivated, sensing layers beneath the surface, moments of vulnerability Lucas didn't share with just anyone. In the quiet corners of the warehouse, time seemed to stretch and bend. Ethan noticed the way Lucas's eyes lingered, how his smile seemed to reach deeper than casual friendliness. There was a subtle warmth in his tone, a softness that contrasted with the rugged, masculine exterior he carried so effortlessly. Ethan felt a strange mixture of comfort and tension, as if standing too close to something dangerous yet irresistible. While organizing a stack of crates, Ethan's gaze fell upon a personal item, a notebook left carelessly on a shelf. Curious, he picked it up. Flipping through, he realized it contained sketches and notes, fragments of thoughts, and candid reflections that hinted at Lucas's inner world. The warehouse, he realized, was more than a storage space. It was a sanctuary where Lucas's private self unfolded. For the first time, Ethan felt as though he was seeing Lucas truly, not just the polished neighbor he passed in the hallway. A sudden noise, metal scraping against concrete, made Ethan start. Lucas chuckled softly, turning to him with that same intense gaze. "You're still here, huh? I guess I don't mind," he said, his voice carrying a teasing undertone that made Ethan's pulse skip. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken questions and possibilities. Ethan swallowed hard, aware that something fundamental had shifted in him, though he didn't yet understand what. Curiosity, attraction, and a subtle fear mingled into a heady mix that made him reluctant to leave. The warehouse had always been a place of mystery, but now it felt like the threshold of something far more complicated, something that could change the ordinary rhythm of his life forever. As he stepped toward the door, Ethan found himself hesitating. One last glance at Lucas caught him off guard, a look that was at once friendly, probing, and deeply personal. He felt a flutter of anticipation, a warning, and an invitation all at once. Ethan realized that the ordinary world he had known was slipping away, replaced by an uncertainty he both feared and longed to explore. The door closed softly behind him, but the warehouse, and Lucas, remained vivid in his mind. Everything was about to change.
The next few days passed in a haze of quiet tension. I kept to my routines, but every corridor, every glance in the cafeteria, reminded me of Ryan. The moments we shared in his dorm lingered in my mind, not as memory alone but as a presence, like a shadow that refused to leave. I tried to focus on my studies, my late shifts at the library, even casual conversations with Noah, but nothing could fully distract me from the pull of what had begun. Ryan reached out first, text messages that were casual on the surface but loaded with undertones only I could read. Library, one read. Another, need a second opinion on something. Every message brought the same mix of anticipation and apprehension. Noah noticed before I could even explain. "You're acting different," he said over lunch, cutting into a grilled chicken salad as if it were a confession. "Something's happening with you and the captain." I looked at him, reluctant to speak. "It's nothing like that." Noah's eyebrows rose. "Right. Nothing. You've got the same look he does when he's hiding something, like it's exciting and terrifying all at once." I couldn't deny it, not entirely. Ryan's presence had a gravity that tugged at me in ways I hadn't expected, and I knew that whatever was happening was dangerous. Not because it was overtly wrong in a physical sense, but because it already breached invisible boundaries, the unspoken agreements of loyalty, friendship, and honesty. By midweek, our interactions had shifted from casual check-ins to longer, more deliberate conversations. One evening, after a seminar on creative writing, Ryan asked me to walk with him across the campus quad. The night air was crisp, and the lampposts cast soft circles of light on the wet pavement. "I can't keep pretending," he said suddenly, his voice low and deliberate. "Lucas, she doesn't deserve this, not from me." I stopped, looking at him closely. The football captain, the figure everyone admired, was unraveling before me, exposing the same vulnerabilities I had glimpsed in his dorm. "Then what are you going to do?" I asked. That he shrugged, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I can't just leave her. Not like that. But I can't keep pretending either. It's like I'm stuck between who I should be and who I am." I wanted to reach out, to bridge that chasm, but I hesitated, aware that my role in his inner turmoil was already too significant. "You have to decide for yourself," I said carefully. "No one else can make it for you." He nodded, and we continued walking in silence. There was a tension that wasn't uncomfortable but palpable, like electricity hovering just above the skin. Each step seemed to carry us closer to something unnamed, something we both knew would change the balance of our relationship irreversibly. The next night, Ryan appeared at the library where I worked, not as the captain, not as the admired athlete, but simply as a man who needed someone to see him. He leaned against the doorway, a subtle smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You're here later than usual," he observed, stepping inside. "I have a paper due," I said, pretending the mundane explanation could mask my racing heart. He moved closer, stopping just a few feet away. "I need to talk to someone I trust. Can we sit?" We found a quiet corner, away from the stacks. He spoke of expectations, of games won and lost, of the invisible pressures of maintaining a public image. And then, without preamble, he said, "I've been thinking about what happened in my dorm. About us." I froze. The air seemed to thicken. "Us?" I repeated, carefully. "Yes," he said, leaning back in his chair. I didn't know it then, but I think I was looking for someone to understand the part of me that isn't seen. "You saw it, Ethan. You really saw it." The word sent a shiver down my spine. I understood the depth of his meaning. This wasn't about attraction alone, it was about recognition, the human need to be truly understood. And yet, I felt the tug of guilt. Lucas was real, and her presence, even unseen, weighed like a shadow across Ryan's confessions. I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just be here. That's enough." Over the next few days, our secret communication intensified. Texts, fleeting hallway glances, study sessions that stretched into late-night talks. Each interaction, innocent in isolation, compounded into something undeniable. I found myself thinking about him constantly, aware that we were treading a line that could never be fully retraced. Rumors began to drift through campus, subtle whispers that hinted at something unusual. Ryan's behavior, his sudden quietness, did not go unnoticed by his teammates or by Lucas. She approached him one evening at a football practice, calm but perceptive. "You've been distant," she said, voice even, almost rehearsed. "Is everything okay?" Ryan's response was careful, measured. "Just tired." "Classes, practice," he offered a smile, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Later, he admitted to me that he had lied, not maliciously, but to preserve appearances. "I can't let anyone know what's happening," he confessed. "Not Lucas. Not anyone. It's easier to hide than to explain." I understood, yet the weight of secrecy pressed on me, a quiet guilt that refused to be dismissed. I was caught in a delicate dance between connection and conscience, each step forward pulling me deeper into Ryan's world, each step backward tempting me with relief. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the campus, Ryan and I found ourselves again in the dorm hallways, voices low. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he admitted, eyes distant. "But I also don't want to lose myself." I watched him, recognizing the turmoil I had glimpsed from the start. "Sometimes, the hardest thing is choosing honesty over comfort," I said. That he nodded, a quiet understanding passing between us. The line we were approaching was invisible but potent, stretching taut with unspoken possibilities. The world outside the dorm walls continued in its ordinary rhythm, oblivious to the tension building within, but we both knew the moment of reckoning was approaching. That night, as I walked back to my apartment, the cold air biting at my cheeks, I realized something. What had begun as a conversation had evolved into something more intricate, more dangerous, and yet entirely human. The next choice Ryan made, and the part one would play in it, would determine whether the connection between us could survive the truth, or if it would crumble under the weight of expectation and loyalty. That I didn't yet know which path awaited, but I sensed, with a quiet certainty, that neither of us would emerge unchanged.
The days after the rain-soaked encounter, Ethan felt a restless tension that refused to fade. Every message, every call from Kofi carried an unspoken weight. Even a simple, "Hey, want to hang out," seemed to vibrate with meaning, reminding Ethan of the shift that had already taken place between them. The line between friendship and something more had blurred, leaving him exhilarated, anxious, and deeply conflicted. Kofi seemed aware of the effect he had on Ethan and, without overt declaration, continued to push boundaries. Small gestures, a hand brushing Ethan's shoulder, a lingering gaze, became more deliberate, more intimate. Each interaction left Ethan both wanting and wary, caught in a storm of desire and guilt. He loved the closeness, yet feared it, aware that crossing the unspoken line could upend everything they had shared. One evening, Kofi invited Ethan to his apartment under the pretext of watching a movie together. The dim lighting, the quiet hum of the city outside, and the soft music in the background created a private cocoon. Kofi sat close, an arm casually draped along the back of the sofa. Ethan felt the heat of proximity, the tension building between them like an invisible current. He wanted to pull away, to remind himself of boundaries, but he found himself frozen, captivated by Kofi's presence. Words were scarce, yet their silence was heavy with meaning. Kofi spoke finally, his voice low and sincere. "Ethan. I don't want to force anything. But I can't deny how I feel." Ethan's chest tightened. He understood the weight of the confession, not in the grand, dramatic way, but in a quiet, unavoidable reality that demanded attention. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, Ethan realized just how deeply he had been drawn in, how much he had allowed his emotions to take the lead. Guilt gnawed at him. He thought of his own principles, the trust he had with friends and family, and the societal expectations that weighed heavily on him. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't deny the thrill of connection, the sense of being truly seen and understood by Kofi. He wrestled internally, desire versus restraint, morality versus heart. The tension was suffocating, yet impossible to ignore. Kofi's presence was transformative. His confidence and openness forced Ethan to confront emotions he had long buried, feelings he had struggled to accept even within himself. Ethan realized that the ride, the lingering touches, the shared moments, they had revealed truths about his identity, his desires, and his capacity for intimacy. He began to understand that life was no longer a series of safe, predictable choices, it was complicated, messy, and profoundly human. By the time the night ended, Ethan felt changed. Not because he had acted on temptation, but because he had confronted it, acknowledged it, understood it, and recognized its impact on his life. He and Kofi remained close, yet the nature of their connection had shifted irrevocably. Trust and friendship remained, but layered now with awareness, with vulnerability, and with unspoken possibility. In the following weeks, Ethan reflected on the transformation. He understood that relationships, whether romantic, platonic, or somewhere in between, were not defined solely by action, but by honesty, courage, and self-awareness. Kofi had challenged him to confront his fears, to acknowledge his desires, and to embrace the complexity of emotion without shame. It was a lesson in self-acceptance and growth, one Ethan knew would stay with him long after the fleeting moments of tension had passed. The final scene mirrors the story's opening, but with subtle change. Ethan rides his bike alone along the same suburban streets, the wind still tugging at his hair, the hum of tires on asphalt familiar and comforting. Yet now, each moment carries reflection, the past day's emotional turbulence, the subtle shifts in his understanding of friendship and love, and the awareness that life's most meaningful connections often come with complexity. As the sun dips below the horizon, Ethan slows his bike at the park where he and Kofi had paused so many times. He leans against the railing, letting the breeze wash over him, and thinks quietly, that ride had changed everything, not in ways he could have predicted, but in ways that mattered. Some doors had opened, others had shifted, and his heart, once cautious and hesitant, had been awakened to a truth he could no longer ignore. Days passed since Ethan's last visit to the warehouse, yet the echoes of that afternoon refused to fade. Every time he passed Lucas's building, his mind replayed the smallest details, the curve of Lucas's smile, the faint brush of his hand, the warmth of his gaze that had seemed to linger just a moment too long. Even mundane tasks, making coffee, scrolling through messages, felt muted, shadowed by the memory of the connection he had discovered. The world outside the warehouse had lost some of its vibrancy, as if the ordinary had been replaced by a quiet, persistent tension. Ethan tried to return to his routines, convincing himself that he had merely glimpsed a curiosity he couldn't fully act on. Yet, each time his phone buzzed, a simple, "Hey, can you help me with something?" sent his heart into a frenzy. The messages were brief, casual on the surface, yet laden with a subtle intimacy that neither confirmed nor denied the depth of their connection. Ethan's thoughts became a tangled web of desire, apprehension, and guilt, leaving him both exhilarated and anxious. One evening, unable to resist any longer, Ethan returned to the warehouse. The air was cooler now, tinged with the faint scent of oil and dust that had become strangely comforting. Lucas was there, moving boxes with his characteristic ease, yet he paused when he saw Ethan. His eyes lit with recognition and something deeper, curiosity, anticipation, and perhaps a hint of longing. Ethan felt the pull immediately, the same magnetic tension that had drawn him in the first time. He realized he had been anticipating this moment far more than he had consciously admitted. As they worked, conversation took on a softer, more reflective tone. Lucas spoke of his dreams, his fears, and the moments that had shaped him into the man Ethan was gradually beginning to understand. Each word seemed carefully chosen, each story a window into a side of Lucas that few people ever saw. Ethan, in turn, shared fragments of his own life, though cautiously. The vulnerability between them deepened, a quiet intimacy that required no physical gesture, yet carried a power that made Ethan acutely aware of every heartbeat, every breath. The atmosphere was charged, yet tempered with restraint. There was no overt crossing of boundaries this time. Instead, the focus was on connection, understanding, and the unspoken acknowledgement of feelings that neither dared to fully name. Ethan felt a profound shift within himself, a recognition that attraction was not just about fleeting moments or physical proximity, but about the trust, vulnerability, and awareness that had begun to bind him to Lucas. A sudden noise from the street below, a car engine, distant footsteps, pulled them both from the cocoon of their shared space. Lucas glanced at Ethan, a fleeting smile playing on his lips. "It's never that quiet, is it?" he murmured, a hint of amusement in his voice. Ethan smiled back, a mixture of relief and longing, aware that each encounter left him more entangled in the emotions that Lucas evoked. As the afternoon waned, Ethan prepared to leave. He felt a strange reluctance, a tension that made the walk back to his apartment feel heavier than usual. Lucas watched him go, his eyes following Ethan's every step. "See you soon?" he asked, casual yet charged with meaning. Ethan nodded, aware that "soon" held a promise, a continuation of something larger, something transformative. Walking home, Ethan reflected on the changes that had taken root. The warehouse had become more than a place, it was a catalyst, a mirror reflecting aspects of himself he hadn't confronted before. His curiosity had grown into attraction, his hesitation into anticipation. He understood that the ordinary rhythm of life was forever altered, each day now carried a subtle tension, a question of what might unfold next, and a longing he could neither suppress nor fully define. Ethan's thoughts lingered on Lucas, on the warehouse, and on the quiet moments that had already reshaped his understanding of desire, trust, and connection. He realized that this was only the beginning, not an ending, but a threshold. Something had changed irrevocably, leaving him poised between the familiar world he had always known and the unpredictable, compelling pull of the emotions Lucas had awakened. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt alive in a way he had never expected.